Hi, this is Terry Thompson, and it's about writing. It's About Writing is a weekly vlog by writers for writers to educate, encourage, and promote writers. Join us as we interview people with experience in all areas of writing and promotion. So today we have Lynne Tagawa with us, and she has written a number of books, and I'll let her tell you about herself. Go ahead, Lynne.
Hi, thank you so much, Terry. I am thankful to be able to chat with you today. And I was first of all an educator, a teacher, and so I'm lately come to writing, and it actually flowed from my experiences as a teacher because my first book was actually a curriculum. A history curriculum. And so you can see how historical fiction did not take too long to come around.
Yeah. What grade did you teach? Or was it a?
Secondary, the older kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to laugh, but I'm a science teacher.
Oh, I thought you were a history teacher.
Yeah, it's really weird because the way I got into that in the beginning was I was asked by the principal to select a Texas history curriculum, and they were all boring.
Oh.
I started looking into it, and I didn't know any better. You know, I was a history teacher, so I ended up writing one myself. That was more like a novel.
Oh.
I could not bear to think of boring my students, and so that was the beginning of it. And also, after our school shut down, I began homeschooling. And homeschoolers understand how you become very eclectic. You are the history teacher as well as the science teacher and everything
Right.
else. And so that was wonderful because, of course, I read everything that I bought for them, including different books that taught history through literature. And I think there were some books that I read that they didn't, you know, because it was also so fascinating. And then, of course, I ended up actually writing fiction. So that I'm late to the game.
Well, that's okay. Many of us start later. And so, or I started early, but it just took me a long time to get off and running because of, uh-oh, I lost your video. There we go. Yeah, just because of life getting in the way,
Okay.
work, and I was a homeschooler too, so homeschooling got in the way
Okay.
too, so yeah. So what do you love about historical fiction?
Oh, it is the you are there aspect of it where, wow. Um, I guess when we think of fiction, we think of entertainment, we think of escapism, and we like to be dropped into another time period, into another person's mind who might actually have a different way of thinking.
Right.
And this is actually educational. If
Mhm.
I can use that word, we usually think of education as hard work and tests and memorizing names and dates. But you're going to see that I'm kind of passionate about this. When a toddler learns, he investigates things that we wish he didn't. And he's always learning, and it's never a chore.
Right.
And it's only when we get into formal schooling that we decide that learning is a chore, or that it's hard or something to be avoided. And I don't know if you've noticed it yet, but reading reviews, you'll read, let's say you read a historical fiction novel and then you look at the reviews and they'll say, oh, I learned something. Oh, I never knew. And
Yeah.
so there is this delight in learning something about the 18th century or the 19th century or World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just enjoyed this book by Bodhi Thaney,
Oh,
uh, the the Twilight of Courage, I think it's called, and it's a World War II book. I thought, wow, I didn't know any of this,
wow.
and so we enjoy that when it is in that fictional setting,
Right.
and so I like to bring out in my writing stuff that, oh well, maybe this isn't so widely known.
Yeah. Do you have a certain time period that you're drawn to mostly? Or how do you pick which time period you're going to write about?
Well, I ended up in the 18th century, the 1700s,
Mm-hmm.
simply because I noticed that there really wasn't much at all written about the Great Awakening.
Oh, yeah.
And this was that period starting in the late 1730s and into the 1740s, where you had George Whitefield preaching, and he is one of the main founders of the what we call the Methodist denomination. Not that he had any idea about that, but he just had all these converts, and so he preached from the late 1730s up into 1770. He died after uh, preaching. He died the next morning, and he was buried uh, somewhere in New England. And so he made 13 trips to the colonies and preached up and down the eastern seaboard. And it was a tremendous, uh, it affected our country like nothing else in that century did.
Wow.
And nobody writes about it.
Right.
Oh, I can think of maybe two books off the top of my head. Well, there's another one, but it's a juvenile.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and only one that's actually kind of a famous sort of writer. Jack Kavanaugh has one that's set during that time period. So I thought this is open. I can pick this, and plus I'm a little bit, passionate about it. So I started writing. Well, let's see, that was the Shenandoah Road.
Okay.
And so once I was writing this, I thought, wow, this would make a neat trilogy. And so I decided to take the family and just extend that and cover the interesting points, like the one I just that's being published this month is the French and Indian War.
Okay.
But it still has a little bit of that tail end of the Great Awakening in it, because that affected the whole century.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one that I'm hoping to write, Lord willing, would take place during the Revolutionary War, which is of course done a lot. I've read some good ones, but again, I think there's room there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. History is so great. So how do you go about, or how would you tell another writer to go about researching a historical setting?
A setting?
or that historical period, and I'm assuming the setting as well. You would have to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, some of the things I stumbled across, you can start with a textbook. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. Um, but then the some of the stuff that I enjoyed the most were older materials.
Mhm.
I found this, I think it was published in 1960. It's as old as I am. Um, and it's called Shenandoah.
Oh.
And it had the neatest little anecdotes and vignettes. And so, excuse me, it gave me a place to start really because, oh, well, there's this person and there's this person. And with the internet, you can hopefully find more. Some of these real life people, they weren't like George Washington. They were minor characters,
Right.
yet they were important too. And so um, you have to do a
The
little.
most fascinating stories can be those people that we don't know about.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I've got some of these people in here, and then Heart of Courage. Some of those same people, I follow them,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, some of them were actually quite important, but they just aren't the big names.
Mhm. So it's fun to dig out those minor details that we just don't read about in school.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. In fact, in Heart of Courage, researching a Native American character was really challenging. And that one, it was made even more difficult because you're not just looking at a small group, the Shawnee or, well, they're not today a really large group of people, but we're talking about 1750 when, they didn't have anybody writing down their.
Right.
So the only thing you're going to get is, well, you're going to get the white man's perspective,
Mhm.
and then you might get a story written down by a captive
Mhm.
or by a missionary, or maybe a person who tried to be a missionary and that didn't work out well. But it's difficult to do that research, and so I had to put together a lot of bits and pieces.
Mhm.
But some of the stuff I did find was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, there's only so much I can tell you because it's like this is a plot point in the
Oh
story.
yeah. Don't give away any major secrets.
Yeah.
But I do too. I'm just fascinated by the Native Americans and their story and their medicine and
Hmm.
I love different cultures anyway, so that's always fun to read about in fiction.
And that is a whole nother area that I deliberately put into my stories, had to do with cultures. And not just the Native American culture, um, even just English speaking peoples, there were differences, there were different backgrounds that, we think of the colonists as this homogeneous group, but they really weren't.
Mhm.
There were the New Englanders, and then there were the Virginians,
Mhm.
the Quakers,
Mhm.
and then you had this huge group that came over in the 1700s from Northern Ireland but they were actually Scots, most of them.
Oh, okay.
They were Presbyterian Scots, and things were going bad in Ireland, and these people, they left Ulster by the, I'm thinking the hundreds of thousands. We have no numbers, official numbers like we would today, but there was a huge exodus. And many of them came to the colonies and settled in places like the Shenandoah Valley. And so I had to dig into that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And how were these people different from the New Englanders? So I decided to have a little romance.
Oh,
And
there you go.
a New England girl and a frontiersman, one of these Scotsmen.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's quite interesting to see how they have to face their differences.
Mm-hmm. That offers some tension and conflict.
Yeah,
When there's differences. Yeah.
so I, you know, not just with the Native Americans, but also with all these different groups.
Mm-hmm.
One character would see the culture of the other, and wow, how does that look?
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. So, do you have any tips for people who would want to do move into historical fiction, and like any favorite resources or suggestions where to find besides a textbook or?
I would say you need to find these people in their own words.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally found a part of, well, there was this one minister, the pastor of two churches in the Shenandoah Valley. And his name was John Craig. And once I found him, I had to, you know, do online research and find more about him. I finally found a website where they had not only part of his autobiography, but his last sermon given at this particular church. So I had a whole sermon.
Wow.
Plus just his own expression. And so I printed that all out. I've got all these stacks of stuff from the internet. And you get bits and pieces. Like, I'll have a book and it'll quote somebody. And I'm thinking, I want the rest of that quote. So then you have to find, oh, what book did they get it from?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you really want these original quotes and original, how did they think? And sometimes if you can find like a diary or a journal, those are nice too.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tendency to imagine that they think like we think and they talk like we talk. And so it informs our writing. The more we can kind of saturate our minds in their thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's something great about reading historical fiction is that we realize it's not exactly like we think. They were in a different time, they saw things differently, thought about things differently, and that's what we learn. But only if the author really did their research. Right.
Yeah, readers are really they're picky. You know, they can pick up on if we didn't do that research.
Right.
Yeah, is that phrase something they would have used? I'll look up. the origin of a word. When was this word first used?
Mm-hmm.
And there are resources like that online, or even the dictionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's impossible to get it exactly right, even word choices and
Oh,
everything. But if there's if you know something about it and you can add that in, it just gives it that authentic
yes, yes. Because
heart.
you want to communicate too. And this becomes a problem if you are, say, farther back than, say, the revolution. You have to start thinking about word choices.
Mm.
If you're too authentic, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
And so I've got writing problems where, okay, I've got the Scots from Ulster or the Scots from Scotland. And when they come over, they are using vocabulary that's totally foreign to us.
Wow.
Well, how much do we add of that?
Yeah.
And I have to say, okay, a little bit is kind of like setting.
Mm-hmm.
You're making it realistic. You know, it's just like the clothes,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't put too much or it's gonna hinder the writing and the reading experience.
Right, right. We don't want to be so confused we lose track of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great advice. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to give? Any other tips for writers?
Um, I would say that plotting is a little bit different, or at least for me. I don't know how other historical fiction writers do it. I know there's so many different ways to plot
Mm-hmm.
that this is just a big, big subject. But for me, I notice my plotting, I have to choose a skeleton that corresponds with the historical events.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to kind of stick those on the mental corkboard at least. And then start working in, okay, well, what, from a sense of drama, what needs to happen where.
Right.
So that's a little different.
When you started writing, since it was more recent in your life, did you look for specific books or did take a class or anything, or did you just jump in?
Well, it's interesting. I I did read books, but it was kind of a concurrent process to where I look back at my debut novel, which was not historical at all, it's contemporary. And that I think of as my creative writing 101 because I was writing it and then at the same time I was getting feedback from critique groups and then I would buy a book and read the book
Right.
and go back to writing. And then I got stuck.
Oh.
I got stuck at about 30%, you know. And then I found James Scott Bell's book, Writing from the Middle.
From the middle? Yeah, that's so good.
And in that particular case, he rescued me. And I managed to finish that story. But, when you're just starting out, it's like, yeah, I made a lot of newbie mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's how you learn.
Right.
So, yeah, I think I read the books. I was more into books than classes
Mm-hmm.
because I look at a class and I would look at the price tag.
Right.
And you know what? I could buy a book for that, for
Yeah.
much less. So I have really you know, there are some books I've really enjoyed that really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so give me the top three.
Top three books?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so there's Self-Editing by Brown and King. And of course, that's, you know, world famous.
Right.
The editing part. And it's not just for editing, because a lot of the topics in there are like dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
point of, you know, all these basic things. And you may laugh, but one of the other ones that is right up there is Stephen King's book.
On writing. Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure why. I just liked that so much. Maybe because it wasn't like telling me what to do.
Mm.
It was more like having a friend confess his faults.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, you had that problem too. And so
And if Stephen King had that problem, it's
yeah,
okay.
if he has to cut 10%, then okay, then yeah, I'll do that too. So yeah, and there are other books that have helped me, but that one was helpful, I think, partly because it cheered me up.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
We always need that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Did you want to let us know where we can find your books and what's available right now?
Well, all my books are on Amazon, and both Kindle and print copy. And the Shenandoah Road has been made into audiobook.
Oh, fun.
So that is that was a fun process, and I'm really glad I did it too, because there are people who, you know, they just can't sit down with a book, but they have a, you know, they have to work, or
Mm-hmm.
so they have been enjoying that. And then I have a new release. This is it's got a gray thing. It's The Heart of Courage is the sequel to the Shenandoah Road, and that is available for pre-order. Now, by the time you post this,
Well, I'll probably post it tomorrow.
Okay. Well, this is available for pre-order, 99 cents through the 15th. And then
Is
so
that
that's
at your website or on Amazon for pre-order?
so you can click that on Amazon. So yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Hold on a minute and we can talk a little more after I
Okay.
stop. Thanks, everybody. This has been It's About Writing.